Okay, so $10.5 trillion. By next year, that's what they're saying. That's what they're projecting the global cost of cybercrime could reach. 10.5 trillion.
Yeah, it's a trillion with a T. It's kind of hard to even imagine that kind of number, but it just goes to show the scale of the problem.
Yeah.
How big of a challenge it is to keep everything secure.
I mean, it really, when you hear that, it makes you realize how vulnerable we all are in this digital world, right?
Absolutely. And it underscores why we need to have robust security measures in place more than ever before.
And that's what we're going to dig into today, how companies can actually tackle this challenge. Specifically, we're diving into Cloudflare One and how it can be a solution for CISOs. And I'm talking about Chief Information Security Officers, the folks responsible for keeping a company's data safe, who are looking into these new ideas, SIC and Zero Trust.
Right. And even if you're not a CISO yourself, these concepts are really relevant for anyone who's interested in, the future of cybersecurity. I mean, whether you work in IT or just use the internet, this stuff affects us all.
For sure. So this deep dive, we're basing it on a blog post by Adam Blackington. It came out on April 6th, 2025. And by the way, don't worry if those terms SE and Zero Trust sound a little like, tech jargon.
Yeah, we'll definitely break those down and explain them in a way that makes sense.
Exactly. So think of this like your cheat sheet to really understanding what these things are, how they work, and why they're so important right now.
I think that's a great way to put it. It's like we're taking Adam's insights and really unpacking them in a way that anyone can follow.
So I guess the best place to start is by looking at the current security landscape. And, I think it's fair to say that the old ways of doing things, they're not cutting it anymore.
Yeah, that's for sure. Traditionally, security was all about the perimeter, right? You build a strong wall around your network, you control who comes in and out, and you think you're good.
Right, like a fortress.
Exactly. But that just doesn't work in today's world.
Mm.
I mean, think about how much work has changed, even just in the past couple of years.
I mean, remote work, right? That's
Yeah.
huge now.
Huge. Adam actually points out that last August, in 2024, almost 23% of employees in the U.S. were working remotely at least part of the time. And the projections are saying that over 32 million Americans will be fully remote in 2025.
So that's a lot of people outside the traditional office walls.
Yeah, and if they're accessing company data from all over the place, that old perimeter security model just falls apart.
It's like trying to guard a castle when your knights are scattered all over the kingdom, right? You can't protect everything.
Exactly. And then on top of that, you've got the fact that so much data is now in the cloud. Adam mentions that 60% of business data is projected to be in the cloud by next year.
Okay, so now it's not even about your own network anymore. It's about securing all this data that's spread out across different cloud providers.
Right. And when you combine that with the rise of remote work, it creates a much more complex and vulnerable attack surface. It's not like everything's neatly contained behind a firewall anymore.
And the stakes are so high, right? I mean, we're talking about serious financial consequences if something goes wrong. Adam's post mentions that the average cost of a data breach in 2024 was almost $4.9 million.
That's not chump change. It's serious money. And it shows why companies are scrambling to find new ways to protect themselves.
And that's where SaaS and Zero Trust come in. So let's talk about those.
Okay, so SASE, Secure Access Service Edge. It's a mouthful, but it's basically a new approach to security that's designed to address all these challenges we've been talking about.
Okay, so how does it actually work?
Well, the way Gartner defines it, it's about converging networking and security capabilities into a single cloud-delivered service.
Okay.
So instead of having a bunch of separate boxes and appliances for things like your firewall, your VPN, your intrusion detection system, all that stuff, SaaS puts it all together in the cloud.
So it's like a one-stop shop for all your security needs delivered over the internet.
Exactly. And that makes it much easier to manage and scale your security as your needs change.
And what about Zero Trust? How does that fit into the picture?
So Zero Trust is a security framework, a philosophy, if you will, that's becoming super important in this new world of cloud and remote work. It basically says, don't trust anyone or anything by default.
Even your own employees.
Even your own employees. You always verify, you always authenticate. So instead of assuming that someone is safe just because they're inside the network, Zero Trust says, prove it. Show me you're who you say you are and that you should have access to this particular resource.
Okay, so every time someone tries to access something, even if they've logged in before, they still have to go through this verification process.
Yep, every single time. It's all about minimizing the risk by constantly checking and rechecking.
That makes sense, especially with all the sophisticated threats we see these days.
And there are three main principles to Zero Trust. verify explicitly, enforce least privilege, and assume breach.
Okay, break those down for me.
Sure. So verify explicitly means you're using strong authentication methods to make sure users and devices are who they say they are. Things like multi-factor authentication, where you need a code from your phone in addition to your password, or even biometric authentication using fingerprints or facial recognition.
Got it. So it's not just about usernames and passwords anymore.
Nope, it's got to be much more robust than that. Then enforce least privilege. This means you're giving people the absolute minimum level of access they need to do their jobs. No more, no less. So if someone only needs access to certain files, they don't get access to the whole file server. You're limiting their ability to move laterally within the network and potentially do more damage if they're compromised.
That makes a lot of sense. You're basically containing the blast radius if something bad happens.
Exactly. And the last one is assume breach. This is a big mindset shift for a lot of organizations. It means operating under the assumption that someone has already gotten in, that there's already a bad actor inside your network.
So it's not about if it happens, it's about when it happens.
Right. And by assuming that a breach has already occurred, you're building your security posture around that idea. You're putting in controls and safeguards to detect and limit the damage if someone is already in there snooping around.
So to recap, SES is the platform, how security is delivered from the cloud, and Zero Trust is the underlying philosophy that guides how you control access and protect your systems.
You got it. They work hand in hand to create a much more secure and resilient environment.
Okay, so now let's talk about Cloudflare One and how it actually puts all of this into practice.
So Cloudflare One is a platform that's really designed to help organizations implement both SES-A and Zero Trust principles. It's built on this massive global network, over 300 cities around the world.
Wow, 300 cities, that's huge.
Yeah, it's a big deal because it means that they can provide low latency and high availability for users no matter where they are.
Okay, so that's the foundation. What about the specific security services that are part of Cloudflare One?
Right, so they have a whole suite of integrated services. One of the key ones is called Zero Trust Network Access, or ZTNA. They actually call it Cloudflare Access. And it's basically a modern replacement for traditional VPNs.
Okay, so how is it different from a VPN?
Well, with a VPN, you typically connect to the entire network, right? You get access to everything. But with ZTNA, you only get access to the specific applications and resources that you're authorized for.
So it's much more granular control. You're not giving everyone the keys to the kingdom just because they connected to the network.
Exactly. And that's a key part of implementing Zero Trust.
What else do they have?
Okay, so they also have Secure Web Gateway, or SWG. They call it Cloudflare Gateway.
And what does that do?
It basically acts as a filter for all your internet traffic. It inspects websites and applications that users are trying to access
Yeah.
and blocks any malicious content.
So it's like a security guard for your web browsing, making sure nothing nasty gets in.
Right. It can block malware, phishing attacks, and even control access to certain categories of websites based on your company's policies.
Makes sense. So Z18A for controlling access to internal applications, and SWG for securing web traffic. What else is there?
They also have a Cloud Access Security Broker, or CASB.
Okay, another acronym. What's that all about?
So a CASB is specifically designed to secure the use of SaaS applications. Things like Google Workspace, Salesforce, Zoom, all those cloud-based apps that companies rely on.
Right, those are everywhere these days.
Yeah. So the CASB monitors how these apps are being used, makes sure no sensitive data is leaking out, and helps enforce compliance with security policies. And Adam highlights some new updates to Cloudflare's CASB that are actually pretty big, like the ability to scan data stored in AWS S3 and Google Cloud Storage.
And why is that important?
Well, think about it. So much data is now stored in these cloud storage services, right? So being able to scan that data for security risks and compliance violations is super important.
Yeah, it's all about visibility and control, right? Knowing what's out there and being able to protect it.
Absolutely. Okay, so a few more key pieces of Cloudflare One. They have Firewall as a service, or FWAS, which they call Magic Firewall.
Okay, so it's like a traditional firewall, but in the cloud.
Yep. It enforces network-level security rules for all your traffic, whether it's coming in or going out, and they have data loss prevention, or DLP.
Okay, so what does that do?
It's all about preventing sensitive data from leaving the organization's control. Things like confidential documents, customer information, anything that could cause harm if it got into the wrong hands.
Hmm.
And the blog post actually highlights a cool new feature they have called DLP Assist for Microsoft Outlook.
So it helps prevent data leaks through email.
Exactly. Email is still a major vector for data breaches, so having strong DLP controls in place is really important.
Makes sense. Okay, so we've got ZTNA, SWG, CASB, FWAS, DLP. What am I missing?
Oh, and they have remote browser isolation, or RBI.
RBI. Okay, what's the deal with that one?
So this is a really interesting approach to web security. It basically isolates web content from the user's device by running it in a remote, disposable browser environment in the cloud.
Okay, so instead of opening a website directly on your computer, it opens in this isolated environment.
Right. So if the website happens to be malicious or contains some kind of exploit, it's contained within that isolated session and can't infect your actual device.
That's pretty clever. So it's like a safety bubble for web browsing.
Exactly. And all of these different components, the ZPNA, the SWG, the CASB, all of them, they're designed to work together seamlessly.
So it's not just a bunch of separate tools, it's a fully integrated platform.
Right. And that's a big deal because it makes it much easier to manage your security posture. You have a single dashboard to control everything. You get a unified view of your security, and it's all built on that same global network, so you get consistent performance and reliability.
Okay, so now let's get back to zero trust. How does Cloudflare One actually help organizations put those principles into action?
Well, one of the first steps is integrating Cloudflare One with your existing identity provider, or IDP. Systems like Okta, Azure AD, those kinds of things.
So it's about connecting your user identities to the Cloudflare platform.
Exactly. And then they do device posture checks, which means they look at the security status of the device trying to connect.
So is the device patched? Does it have antivirus? That kind of thing.
Right. They want to make sure that the device itself meets certain security standards before granting access. And then you can implement context-aware policies.
What are those?
These policies take into account all sorts of factors, not just user identity and device security, but also things like the user's location, the time of day, the sensitivity of the data they're trying to access.
So it's about looking at the whole picture to make more informed decisions about who gets access to what.
Right. And Cloudflare Access, which is their ZTNA component, and Cloudflare Gateway, they work together to enforce these policies. And they also allow for network segmentation, specifically microsegmentation.
Okay, so what does that mean?
It means you're dividing your network into much smaller, more isolated segments. So if one segment is compromised, the attacker can't easily move laterally to other parts of the network.
So it's like putting up internal walls to contain the damage.
Exactly. It's all about limiting the blast radius, right?
So Cloudflare One, it's covering access to internal applications, web traffic, cloud apps, and it's helping to enforce zero trust principles. What about applications that are hosted in different environments? Some in the cloud, some on premises. How does it handle that?
Cloudflare One is designed to protect applications regardless of where they live. For internal web apps that might be hosted in your own data center, Cloudflare Access provides secure access based on identity and device posture without requiring you to expose those apps directly to the public internet.
So you can keep those apps behind your firewall, but still allow secure access from anywhere.
Right. And for SaaS apps, we talked about CASB for monitoring usage and preventing data leaks, and SWG for filtering traffic to those apps. And then for general web traffic, SWG blocks malicious sites, and RBI isolates potentially risky content. DLP handles data protection both in transit and at rest. And for API security, they offer features like authentication and rate limiting within their SaaS framework.
Okay, so it really is a comprehensive solution. And the blog post also talks about how Cloudflare One integrates with other Cloudflare services. What's the benefit of that?
Yeah, so Cloudflare One isn't a standalone product. It's part of a larger platform. And that integration with other services is a big part of what makes it so powerful. They have Warp Client for endpoint security, Magic WAN for secure connectivity between branch offices, Cloudflare Workers for running custom code at the edge of the network, and R2 Storage for secure object storage.
So instead of having to cobble together a bunch of different tools from different vendors, you can get everything from Cloudflare.
Right. And that can be a big advantage in terms of simplicity, manageability, and cost effectiveness. You have a single vendor to deal with, a single dashboard to manage everything, and you get the benefit of their shared threat intelligence. So when they identify a threat on one part of their network, that information is used to protect all their services.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Now, there are obviously other players in the SASE and zero trust space. How does Cloudflare One stack up against the competition? The blog post mentioned a few, like Zscaler, Palo Alto Prisma Access, and Netscope.
Right. So when you look at their architecture, Cloudflare One and Zscaler are primarily proxy-based, which means they act as an intermediary inspecting traffic as it flows through their network. Palo Alto Prisma Access is more firewall-based. And Netscope initially focused heavily on CASB and SWG, but they've expanded into other SASE areas.
Okay, so different approaches, but similar goals.
Right. And in terms of network reach, Cloudflare's global network, that 300-city network, is a big differentiator. It gives them a potential advantage in terms of performance and latency for globally distributed users.
So if you have employees all over the world, Cloudflare's network might be a good fit.
Yeah, it could make a big difference. And then you look at their feature set. Cloudflare One is pretty comprehensive. They have ZTNA, SWG, CASB, EVWAS, DLP, RBI. It's all there. Competitors offer many of the same capabilities, but the level of integration and ease of management can vary.
Right, so some might be more complex or have separate management consoles for different services.
Exactly. And then there's cost.
Hmm.
Cloudflare One is often seen as a more cost-effective option with straightforward pricing.
So if you're looking for a comprehensive, integrated, and potentially more affordable SaaS solution, Cloudflare One is worth a look.
Absolutely.
So I guess the big question is, why should all of this matter to our listeners? If you're someone who's thinking about the future of security or maybe even stepping into a CISO role down the line, what are the key takeaways here?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that the security landscape is changing rapidly. The old ways of doing things just don't cut it anymore. You need to be thinking about SaaS, zero trust, and how you can implement these principles in your organization.
So it's not just about the technology, it's about a shift in mindset.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And a platform like Cloudflare One can be a really valuable tool in making that shift. It can help you reduce risk, improve compliance, enhance operational efficiency, improve the user experience, and even save money.
And it can help you align your security strategy with broader digital transformation initiatives, right? I mean, so many organizations are going through these huge changes, moving to the cloud, embracing remote work, and security has to be a key part of that.
Absolutely. Can't be an afterthought. It has to be baked into the whole process.
Okay, so to sum it all up, Cloudflare One is a comprehensive, integrated SaaS platform that can help organizations implement zero trust principles and adapt to the changing security landscape.
I think that's a great summary. And for me, the aha moment is seeing how all these different security components like ZTNA, SWG, CASB, all of them fit together within the SANAE framework to create a more cohesive and effective security strategy.
And that brings us to our final thought for you to ponder. Given how interconnected our digital world is and how sophisticated cyber attacks are becoming, what are the most critical shifts in mindset and technology that we need to embrace to build a truly resilient digital future? Because it's not just about buying the latest security gadgets, it's about fundamentally rethinking how we approach security in this new age. Thanks for taking the deep dive with us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.